Hello and welcome to On the Record, a debate-style television talk show where Bahamians will find the balanced, true and open debate you've been looking for. Data shows that this June was the hottest ever recorded, and New Providence residents probably felt it even more as air conditioning units, fans and refrigerators were off for hours at a time. Frequent power cuts and all-out blackouts left thousands of BPL customers hot and outraged. For hours at a time, homes and businesses were still and silent as the summer heat bore down. As the public indignation grew, BPL struggled to find the right explanations to calm angry customers. Plans to build a new plant are months from completion, and the current plants are struggling to keep pace with the ever-increasing demands. No matter the explanations and assurances given, the public outrage grows. Tonight, on the record, we will attempt to get some answers to BPL's power struggle as we talk to some of the company's top executives. But first, a look at where we're at. They are a commonplace in our lives. Power outages in pockets or island-wide, and no island is exempt. For decades, BEC, now BPL, has been challenged with providing consistent power across these islands, and every government, minister and chairman has heard the hue and cry for over 40 years.
It's hot. As a 62-year-old man, I can't take all this heat.
Yeah, it was burning up. It was hot.
Load shedding is an all too familiar term for us. Sweltering summer temperatures mean more strain on the old plants as population and business growth outpaces the output capacity. But the fragile power situation hit a tipping point when two generators taken out for servicing weren't back online in time to beat the summer power rush.
Last week, however, additional units at the Blue Hills plant developed problems, which resulted in them coming offline and setting up the present generation shortfall. 2 units at the Blue Hills power station tripped offline. One of those fed into our steam turbine, which takes the heat energy from the exhaust system of one of those generators to produce power. When that engine came offline, the steam turbine also came offline.
Yet months ago, the government announced a $95 million overhaul to include a new plant would not make it in time to ease the discomfort of another hot and dark summer. And as if the unbearable outages weren't enough, the public now had to endure the blame game.
The PLP failed miserably with respect to generation, and the record is there. Their plan with respect to BPL is in the House of Assembly, was introduced, was tabled in the House of Assembly by me. They kept the Bahamian people kept it secret from the Bahamian people. And you know what is in there about generation? There's nothing. There is no plan.
Reliability, affordability are all at a dismal low. We've heard the promises made that there'll be no blackouts this summer. Well, what are we having now? And summer has just started.
The new plant, now well into construction, won't be in time to save consumers from the horrors of this summer's power cuts. Well, it's all on the record tonight. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. Our discussion begins on the other side of this break. Hello and welcome to On the Record, a balanced, true and open debate you've been looking for. Welcome back. Tonight on the record, we have the chairman of BPL, Mr. Donovan Moxey, as well as the director of public relations for the company, Quincy Parker. Gentlemen, welcome to On the Record.
Thank you. Thank you, Drew.
Donovan, this is your first time here. Quincy, you've been on, but in another capacity previously. We have a lot to talk about. This is probably one of the most highly anticipated shows that we've had. But I want to begin with what you will say. I want us to begin, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. I want us to begin now looking at what you think the solution is to the current problem. Here is a look at how the company, what you put out, how you intend now to fix this problem.
The new board of directors of Bahamas Power and Light Company Limited looked at the situation facing Bahamians as they stared down the barrel of summer 2019 and determined that an answer was needed immediately to address the failing generation assets that were the source of load shedding and unreliable power for Bahamians. The answer was a new power plant, built as quickly as possible. That new plant is going up now at Station A of the Clifton Pier Power Station. The $95 million 132-megawatt plant is anchored by 7 Wärtsilä 50DF high-output engines capable of burning liquefied natural gas, light fuel oil, or heavy fuel oil. These cutting-edge engines also feature sophisticated electronic controls and automation.
So that, of course, is just a clip of something that you have produced that is, in a nutshell, trying to explain what is happening. But I want to start, I guess, at the current situation. Where are we with the installation of these 7 generators in this whole plant that we just heard a little bit about?
Excellent. What we'd like to do here as well, and all of the generators as well as the engines have been moved to the power plant. And so the last of those were moved, I believe, early this week. It was late last week. I believe, late last week, the last of the engines were moved into the power plant. And so where we are right now is we are essentially finishing the construction of that power plant, putting in all the auxiliaries, getting the engines up and running. And our target date for operation is what we would call the early fall of this year. One of the things that I want the Bahamian people to recognize is that the plant that we're building now, the 132 megawatt plant, it is the largest power plant ever built at one time in the history of BEC and BPL. The other thing I want the public to recognize is that after the fire at Clifton Pier, we knew we needed to address our generation issues. And so what we did was, as part of our contracting with Wärtsilä, a plant that normally takes 12 to 15 months to build, we told them we needed it in 9 or 10 months. And so you have a huge workforce made up of Bahamians as well as international workers that are really pushing hard to hit our timeline.
Why do you think, or what is it about this plant that you think will solve all of our generation problems? We have a lot to talk about, but I want to start with the plant and then sort of work my way backwards into all of this. But why do you think this plant is going to solve all of our issues? And it's the, if I can borrow a phrase from a song, you know, we've heard it all before.
Right.
We have been down this road so many times. We're going to fix it. It's going to be all right.
Correct.
We're going to all, you know, hold hands and sing Kumbaya one day. But what do you think this plant will do now to stop this issue?
Understood. One of the things we want the public to recognize is that this plant is a part of a phased approach to solving the issues of BPL. Everybody would recognize and remember that Shell North America was selected as the vendor to build a gas-to-power facility for the island of New Providence. And when the fire happened, we lost about 70 megawatts of generation assets from Clifton Pier. These were 2 of our largest generators in the fleet. We recognized that with Shell building the new 220 megawatt power plant, and we needed to solve the issues of generation at the short term, we had a discussion with Shell. And we said to them, here's our issues that we're facing. We need to actually move this power plant construction up by a couple of years. What we didn't want to do was invest in new generators, have those generators be stranded assets when the Shell plant came on board. So Shell assisted BPL in actually the vendor selection process. We went through an entire process using Shell's internal procurement processes. We identified the vendor and began the construction. So what folks need to understand is that the 132 megawatts that's being put in place is the first phase of the total 220 megawatts that are going to be put in and operated by Shell. What we're looking now is we're looking to switch our base load of generation back to Clifton. If folks will remember historically, our base load was at Clifton in terms of shifting our power generation needs. And because those assets at Clifton were so old, those assets started to fall offline, so we started to bring in new assets at the Blue Hills Power Plant. And so what we have here is a generation facility with an aging fleet, and the fleet's been aging for a long time. And so our decision board-wise strategically is that we needed to get new generation assets, and overall strategically, BPL needed to get out of the generation business. So this is the first step in allowing us to have what we would call stable baseload generation as part of the Providence's network.
How much of what we are experiencing right now in terms of the outages and the load shedding, how much of that is tied to the construction of this new plant?
Not the construction, but a lot of what we're experiencing now is actually tied to the fire. And one of the things that folks who understand the utility business or worked at BPL would recognize is that during the winter months, that's when you do your detailed maintenance on your machines. And sometimes machines are down for a continuous 1 to 3 months, going through major overhauls. But what happened was, because we lost the 72 megawatts of power, we couldn't go through our normal full overhauls during the winter
The
time.
72, that was lost in the fire.
That was lost in the fire.
Okay, so
And
you couldn't do the normal.
Yes, because what you
Okay.
typically would do is you would take down generation assets completely. You would have additional reserves, but because we lost those 2 engines, we didn't have the reserves required. And so once you take generators down, you focus on those in terms of your overhauls for months at a time. What we had to do, because we had limited generation available to us, we had to essentially perform maintenance in an overnight capacity, take an engine down, do very, very basic fundamental maintenance to keep the engines running, and then bring that engine back into service the very next morning. And so most of the work on the maintenance is done overnight in a very controlled fashion.
I want to go back to the fire now. When this fire, how long ago was the fire?
The fire occurred on September 7th
Okay.
of last year.
So between September and let's say May, I guess my question is, did you anticipate, or what I want to ask is, could this have happened faster? I mean, from September to now.
Right.
I mean, that seems like a long
Yes.
time.
One-
And you
yeah.
know summer is coming.
Yes.
You know it's going to be hot.
Yes.
You know all these things are
Yes.
happening. You know, why is it taking so long? Because I'm thinking, hey, you got a fire, you lost these 2
Yes.
generators. Let's get moving now.
Excellent. And what we did, actually, the fire occurred September 7th. We had a board meeting immediately after that, and we decided these assets, we didn't know the state of the assets, because obviously the insurance company was doing the investigation. And we made a decision very quickly as a board, is we need to get new assets in here. Again, when you talk about building a power plant, there are long lead items and there are times, because most engines are built from scratch. We happen to be very fortunate that there were new engines that came available to us, and so we immediately jumped on that opportunity, if you will, as well. And so we did that, recognizing, again, as I said earlier, a typical power plant of this size takes about 12 to 15 months to build. So we immediately negotiated with Wärtsilä that we needed a plant in 9 to 10 months. So we moved it as quickly as we possibly can. Then recognizing, too, that some of our older assets in the fleet were not as reliable as we would like them to be. As part of summer preparation, we then went out to tender and we looked to expand our rental generation assets, which we did with Aggreko. And so as we're moving things forward, knowing full well that we did not have the opportunity to do full maintenance for months at a time, because here it is, you're using every available assets during the wintertime. If you now tell the public, oh, by the way, we're going to be load shedding for 1 to 2 months because we have to do full maintenance, that was not going to go over well in the wintertime. So we did the best we could, given the circumstances, in preparation for where we are now.
Quincy Park, I've got to get you in on this discussion now. As a consumer, I knew sort of what was happening. I knew there were discussions about a new plant. I knew there was a fire. But myself and so many others seem to be caught off guard by the events of the past few weeks. I want to talk about whether you think you all did a good enough job in telling us or preparing us for what we are going through right now. Because I've heard what he said, and this is all now necessary. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But had I known,
The reality is that it's a consumer's market, right? So the fact that you feel as you feel is the only answer that matters. We did not prepare you because you feel that you were caught unprepared. There has been a steady stream of communications from BPL about the aging generation.
Sure.
fleet.
I've heard this over and over and over
Right.
again.
And so the challenge of the current moment is that 2 weeks ago, 2 weekends ago, we were load shedding, and 2 of our major engines failed in the middle of a load shedding incident, which made the outages last much longer than we had anticipated, and which made recovering from that load shedding moment take an incredibly long period of time. And in the frustration of dealing with that, we've come to a place where our consumers feel that we haven't told them anything about anything. And I took that blow, absolutely. But it's almost as if, and I want to be very careful how I say this.
But be honest.
If you've been listening, the news is there. The fleet is old. When we signed a contract with Wärtsilä, we had a press conference with a Wärtsilä contract signing in February of this year. Somebody asked about generation and how much generation we had. And from that, at that press conference, it was explained that we have insufficient generation to meet the demand. Let me finish.
No, I'm glad you brought that up.
To meet the demand, should we lose even one of our major assets.
It's interesting because when I had the minister on here a few weeks ago, I used that exact same quote, and I said to him, BPL has said they do not have enough generation. What are we going to do?
Sorry, Chairman. I'll wrap up on the communication point with this, right? Firstly, we feel really bad that people feel like they were not prepared. We've done a few things to change the way we approach informing people about what's happening. And there are some other things that are happening in the background. I don't know what the chairman may want to speak to, but the commitment from BPL is proactive communications going forward.
So just to be clear, we were in what was a scheduled load shedding, okay? 2 weekends ago. These 2 engines went down simultaneously, 2 generators go down. And so you have now a situation that was supposed to be managed over shorter periods of time that's now exacerbated over many hours. And we're
days, not hours.
Well, okay. Well, the outages were hours and hours and hours over several days. This, of course, was not anticipated.
Right.
In that moment, when that was happening, did it occur to anyone at any point to say, you know, we need to start communicating better with people? We need to.
Right. But this is the hilarious thing to me, Jerome, is that we did. We put out a press statement. On Sunday evening, I think it was.
But this started from Saturday, though, right?
Yeah, but we didn't have the exacerbation until overnight on Sunday, so to speak, right? So Sunday evening, we put out a release. And we took a lot of flack for the fact that the release was clinical. It was too much information, not enough apology.
Right.
And
you accept that?
We did.
Okay.
Right. But I only want to make the point that we did communicate immediately. Well, not immediately, but as soon as we understood what the situation was, we told people what was happening, and we said it is likely that there will be delays in returning these engines to service because there'll have to be repairs. We'll have to investigate what happened, and so on and so forth.
Where are we now? That was 2 weekends ago. Right. The outages continue. Right. Well, the load shedding continues. The outages continue. Right. It's still hot. We're still miserable. We're still mad. Where are we now?
Let me speak to that as well. Before I speak to that too, let me go ahead and define what we talk about enough generation. Okay. One of the things that the public needs to understand is that we are providing generation in what's called an island configuration. Unlike if you think about the US, their grids are connected all over the place. You have certain people in Florida that may get power from Tennessee or all the way up in the Midwest or what have you. And so they have a very connected grid. So generation, to the extent that we're experiencing, they won't run into those issues. It's more T&D issues that they run into. So for us, when we talk about having enough generation, the ideal number of generators is having what we call N-2 redundancy, meaning that you have enough generators available such that you can satisfy the load and you have 2 additional generators right there at your disposal so that if something goes wrong with the ones that are online, you can immediately fire those up
we have that
and
now?
cover that. No, we did not. Now here's
Do
what
we have
we
it
did.
now?
Here's what we did. Here's what we did. Not now, and I'll talk about presently where we are now in the fleet. We recognized that for the summertime, we would not have the N-2 redundancy that we wanted, so that's why we went out and we looked to get additional rental generations from Aggreko. 25 megawatts is what we brought in on that side of it. So what we then looked at is said, it will get us really close to N-2, but you also have to balance that from the fact that we have to pay for these rentals. And when you enter into rental contracts, there's a term associated with that. So we have to balance as well the ability to be able to fund and cover those costs, recognizing what our other obligations are as a company, as a
there's
business.
no open check.
There's no open checkbook. There's no
we'll
deep
talk
well
about the
that's
money
there,
issues
if you will,
later.
as well. And so we did the best decision that we could in getting the additional 25 megawatts of rental generation using the Aggrekos and going through an RFP process. Now, where are we today? Today, where we are is that, no, we don't have enough generation available for us to cover our load with the N-2. We do have 3 generation assets that are now being worked on. And from our perspective, we look to bring one of those assets, maybe 2, online by Sunday, and then the last asset online by the end of next week. And a lot of the delays here have to do with getting parts in and making sure that we have everything we need to get the generator up and running.
So you didn't know you needed these parts?
No. Sometimes if something fails, sometimes it may be something that you have to go ahead and order and have shipped it to you.
We've got to
And so
take
those
a
are the
break.
things that we look
So
at.
definitively, we are hoping and praying, I'm going to use all that together, that within another week, we should be out of the woods.
We should have sufficient generation available to satisfy our load.
Quincy, what you going to say?
No, I was only going to say the term "out of the woods" presumes a lot.
Out of the deep woods.
I just
want to know. I mean, people want to know.
I know what you want
Are
to know.
these
Right.
are these outages going to stop? Are they go? You know,
The difficulty with answering that question definitively is that, and this is what we keep talking about load shedding, right? It's not it's if something happens, BPL will tote the blows
For sure.
for
'Cause you
saying-
said.
and it's happened to me in my WhatsApp on an almost daily basis for the
You
last
said
2
we'd be-
weeks.
we'd be
You
done.
said XYZ the last
So in
day,
another
Chairman.
week or so, what should we expect?
What you should expect, as the chairman has said, is that we will have sufficient generation that we can promise as best we can, barring any unforeseen incidents, that we can supply the demand.
Okay.
That is the strongest
So if
promise
nothing else goes
we can
wrong,
make.
we could be okay.
We should be okay if nothing else goes wrong.
Nothing else
We
goes
should
wrong.
be okay.
Should
Yes.
be. Yeah.
There's no more definitive answer than that.
There's nothing definitive in it. But thank you. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, more on the record right after this.
You know, Matt, where in the world is Matt Lauer? Where in the world is Ellison Greenslade? And so this about the blow while you were concentrating in Atlanta. So we can talk about it.
More on the record tonight. The government's purchase of the Grand Lukine is a hot subject in the news. We're going to.
This portion of On the Record is brought to you by Generali Insurance Company Limited, your employee benefit specialist.
We've been running our generator consistently since June, but since we opened our doors to the public since November 27. And that has been run just about 8 hours every single night due to the lack of power that is received by our establishment.
Saturday, I think it came back on, my daughter called me after 10. So we didn't make anything. I have to make that money to pay that tax, to pay the VAT, and pay national insurance and all of that. But it's bad, but one day at a time.
Tonight on The Record, we're attempting to get some answers to BPL's power struggles as we talk to some of the company's top executives. My guest, Chairman of BPL, Mr. Donovan Moxey, as well as the Director of Public Relations, Quincy Parker. You saw there the full gamut of business people. You've got Fusion on one side, which is a multi-million-dollar facility. Reported in one day they lost something like 32,000. You've got a popular owner, popular chicken shack place, Rosalie, is closed. What? This is more than just an inconvenience.
Right.
You're talking now some serious economic implications. Right. Businesses aren't able to function. 2 days ago, when you had the power outage, I drove through from Bay Street into Palmdale through the blackout. Some doors were closed. Tourists walking by, places in Doctors got into Palmdale. I was looking for lunch and couldn't find anywhere to eat because a few places that I normally go to could not provide service. What recourse is there for us? What are we to do? You're a small businessman. This is how you live. What is the recourse?
Mm-hmm. We certainly understand the challenges that our businesses are facing, and at BPL we empathize with that. And we recognize that we have to do a better job at supplying the power. It's our job to provide power 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we recognize that. And one of the things I'd like to say as well is that we have some very dedicated employees in our generation facility who have been working, a lot of them around the clock, to make sure that happens. And so from our perspective, yeah, it's our job to keep the power on, and we're going to do everything we can to do that. Again, we can simply ask the public to bear with us as we work through this, and we're going to do as best we can to kind of move the process forward.
But you realize that doesn't provide a lot of comfort.
I know, it doesn't provide a lot of
right?
comfort at all.
Yeah.
One of the things that we'd also like to do is to thank a number of the very, very large establishments as well who are helping us during this load shedding period as well. A lot of the major resorts, if you look at Atlantis, Baha Mar, Breezes, and some of the others, what they've done is they've voluntarily self-generate because those are loads that we would typically have to supply. We work through a program we call GAP, which is called a Generation Assistance Program, where a number of these large facilities that require major loads have agreed to come off the grid because they have enough generation to supply themselves, and then it allows us now to provide generation to the wider public.
The island-wide blackout 2 days ago, initially you said you didn't know what was the cause, but now I think just yesterday the minister went into great detail in the House of Assembly as to what caused that. I want us to go into detail a little bit about that. I mean, in the midst of all of this island-wide blackout, not necessarily your fault.
No, and the as the minister pointed out very plainly, the issue there is maybe a subject for another issue.
That's another show. Go ahead.
Right? This illegal dumping situation.
Somebody just dumped a bunch of garbage.
Right. But what happened was the gentleman, the individual in question, slammed into our pole, which he had to have been traveling at a high rate of speed, I believe is the terminology.
You sound like the police.
But he slammed into the pole, and the wires touched. The 132 kilovolt wires which immediately shorted out the system. That's a built-in fail-safe, so that we don't have, catastrophic consequences. The part that I would like to get to is, as soon as the blackout happened, I went to the control room. And I watched as our control staff got the island back from blackout back to full power within 2 hours, which was, to me, phenomenal to see.
What happens to this man?
We don't know who the person is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a situation where, and we know illegal dumping has been plaguing this country for forever. And I think a lot of people aren't really aware of what's above them, what's around them. And so obviously the individual backed into the truck, the pole was gouged significantly, and the rate of speed or the force at which they hit it actually allowed those wires to swing, and as they swung, you have 132 kV
If somebody
lines.
knows what happens,
Trips
they
it
can
off.
report it to you or report it to the police?
They can report it to us, report it to the police. Hopefully somebody saw something.
Let's move past that. I don't want to spend that. It's just an unfortunate situation, and I'm sure it couldn't have happened at a worse time.
No.
Is there a load shedding schedule? And how do you determine which areas go down when?
Correct. I'll speak to this initially, and then we'll have Mr. Parker talk about what we're doing now. From a load shedding perspective, folks need to understand two things. If there's ever an event where a generation asset goes offline instantly, automatically the system is pre-programmed to drop load. And the dropping of that load is predetermined, and it also moves around within the system.
Give me that in layman's terms.
Okay, in layman's terms, here's what happens. If you lose a certain amount of generation in order to supply your customers, immediately you're in a situation where your demand heavily increases, your demand heavily outweighs your supply. So in order to balance that or bring that into balance, the system determines which customers do I need to drop off immediately so I don't cause catastrophic damage within the network and I can't bring the entire network back or I lose significant assets. So that's something that's pre-programmed as a sort of a self-protection mechanism. And so that happens. That's not load shedding, that's simply dropping a load immediately to bring balance into the system.
So that's predetermined. You sort of know which area will go down.
Yes, that's done within our control center. They program that. It happens automatically.
So is that why some areas seem to go down more than others?
Sometimes, I would imagine. Sometimes some areas are programmed in a certain way where the load gets immediately dropped. And it also depends on where the generation asset is lost. So if the generation asset is lost at Clifton, there's a certain pre-programmed combinations that assesses the load, immediately makes a decision on how do I drop load in order to bring balance into the system, same as Blue Hills.
I want to get to the
now, the load shedding part of it as well. The load shedding part of it, there is scheduled load shedding. So if we know and we anticipate that assets need to come offline, like we're doing now, because we know assets are offline for repair, we now have to look at how do we bring equity into the system in terms of where we provide power. So there's a load shedding schedule that's put together by the folks in the control room and in generation. And what we haven't done in the past, which we're looking to change, is we have not given the public enough notice as to when the schedule is going to happen. Now, we've had conversations with the Commissioner of Police, other folks on his team, about how do we coordinate this such that the police understands what's happening in a very controlled, scheduled environment, and the public knows. And so we can put forth the schedule, and we will do our best to follow that schedule to the letter as we move forward as well.
You are going to publish that?
Yes, we're working on a protocol now of communicating with the police, which we got buy-in from the commissioner to go ahead and do. We're working with his liaisons and his officers to put that schedule together. We should have that protocol done here in short order because there will be some load shedding through the remainder of the week because of the assets that we have offline. So we'll do our best to communicate that as effectively and quickly as we can to the public.
I do want you to speak to the concern of publishing it prior to this. I mean, there was this concern that you would alert the criminals or criminal minds. And what was really the thinking behind that, and why have you chosen now to abandon that?
Abandon is a bit of a strong term.
We wouldn't say that.
Move in a different direction. Or publish it.
Thank you. Move in a different direction.
The experience from our CEO, who ran Grand Bahama Power, was that when they did that in Grand Bahama, there was a noticeable spike from his recollection of criminal activity. And you see that too worldwide. Whenever the electricity goes off, criminal activity, petty crime, theft seem to spike. And so for us, albeit we have to provide power 24/7 to our customers' safety is paramount to us. So what we didn't want to do was begin publishing that schedule, recognizing that historically there is a spike in crime and criminal activity. So we had the discussions with the Commissioner of Police. He recognized that the police will be vigilant, understanding that we are in a crisis situation, and they will do everything they can to step up patrols in those specific areas.
Quincy, where can we expect to see that that publication? Where can we expect to see that schedule?
The outlets for publication of a schedule like that will firstly probably be our social media.
Where everybody lives.
Where everybody lives, exactly. Facebook, WhatsApp. We do have a Twitter account. It's not very active as yet. And and in the second instance, our webpage. But our website is undergoing a redevelopment. So for the next few weeks, we're kind of living on Facebook and WhatsApp. And I'd also like to say the police, when we spoke with both the commissioner and subsequent conversations, the police were quite adamant that they were competent to handle any concerns that might arise if we were to publish the schedule.
And it will include the amount of time the power will be off, or just when it's going to occur?
We can give time ranges. Typically, the load shedding is in 2 to 3 hour time increments. But again, we're going to do our best to manage the expectations of our customers, and we're going to do the best we can with that.
A lot of the complaints have also centered around loss of appliances and damage to different things. People who even have generators have told me that they have had to have technicians come out and repair their generators or reset, replace, whatever the terminology is. How do you address that? I mean, in my own personal space, I had to get someone to fix my oven and my microwave.
Understood.
What happens? My appliances are damaged or need to be repaired or no good?
BPL has a structured program in place for claims, to handle such claims that are there. And that involves filling out, of course, a claim form. Accompanying that has to be the opinion of the electrician or repair technician that's looked at your particular appliances to assess if the contributing factor of that appliance no longer working was indeed something caused by a power outage or a power surge. And so those are the things that we have to look at very carefully. Obviously, we want to make sure that in instances where there's responsibility on BPL's side, we'll do our best to make the public whole, either by paying the repair bills, if you will, as well, or in some cases, extreme cases, replacing the appliance. But there is a process we have to go through.
And how do I access that? What do I do if I need to have that replaced?
The forms that it's a claim form that you have to fill out. That is not at present on our Facebook page. It is on our website, but as I say, the website is undergoing some restructuring. So you would, for the time being, you'd have to come in to a BPL facility, get a claim form, and fill it out. And
any idea how long it takes now once you put in the claim?
No, it takes, at the risk of, it takes as long as is necessary for the internal investigation to be completed. And I wouldn't want to put a time frame on that.
You're not sure how long it'll take. Once I submit the form, then it's left up to you
It's
to
probably a
determine.
case-by-case basis. Obviously, one of the things that we say coming out of the gate is that you want to have an electrician or electrician technician actually help you filling in that claim, because we have to assess based on what their assessment is as to what caused the issue. And then once that's given to us, then we do the investigations ourselves internally. So I would say to the public, don't put in a claim form unless you also had a technician take a look at your device and make a determination as to what actually caused the particular failure.
Because you're asking BPL to accept liability for something.
I mean, that's only logical. You obviously
Right.
have to put in something to back up your claim.
Yes, yes.
Well, I said logical, but yeah.
You did say logical.
Yeah, it is logical. So up to now, we've really talked primarily about New Providence and the issues here. Bimini, Abaco also facing some issues as well. Even some vacation rentals have reported that they have lost bookings as a result. People have decided not to come. And it's cost them business. What's being done on those islands to address the issues?
Yes, great. Let's go to Bimini first. And we've had conversations and discussions with the owners of the Bimini Bay Resort about what their challenges have been. Obviously, the fire that occurred in Bimini was something that totally unexpected. That's currently an investigation, and we've determined just at a very high level that we would need to replace that power plant. Now, the good thing, if there is a good thing and a silver lining, actually we have to go through the process of the insurance claim, so it takes a while. But what I can say to you is that the folks in Bimini now have full power. Now, here's what happened. The good thing, if it is good, the fire happened over that holiday weekend. I think it's Memorial Day holiday weekend in Bimini. Typically what we do is we bring in extra personnel and extra generator to the islands just in case we need it to take care of the load. And that's one of the reasons why after that fire occurred, we were able to respond and get everybody back up and running within a matter of a day or so in doing that. What we then did to shore up generation in Bimini is we brought in some rental units into Bimini from New Providence, and we also brought in some additional generators from Grand Bahama that we purchased from a supplier in Grand Bahama. And so that allows us to bring Bimini up in full capacity very, very quickly.
Abaco?
With Abaco, there have been some issues there. On the generator side, we have great capacity in Abaco. And so I know there's some network issues that we've been addressing on the Abaco side. Abaco had huge issues a while back, I think about a year and a half ago. We built a brand new plant in Abaco, brought that on stream. And again, working through the T&D kinks, you have transmission and distribution issues, if you will, as well. We have intermittent issues in Abaco, but Abaco is fairly stable moving forward as well.
Any other islands that are of concern?
We had some challenges in Eleuthera. We have some capacity issues which we're upgrading a transmission line cable in Eleuthera to get additional power into the northern Eleuthera, Harbor Island area. And so we're working through that. And we had some minor issues with some operational issues, if you will, as well. So we're fixing those as well.
Ask this question before we go to the break. And I saw somebody complaining about it yesterday. How is all of this affecting billing and disconnections?
From a billing side of it,
I still being cut off.
Here's the thing with BPL. We bill you for what you actually consume.
Okay.
And so there's no flat billing where we're assuming you're consuming a certain level. We bill you for what you consume. So the billing still occurs as it normally would, if you will, as well. With respect to disconnections, those things are happening on normal schedules. Now, what we have done for our customers and the consumers, here's the thing. BPL is an entity that needs cash flow in order to operate appropriately. If someone is consuming power and they're not paying their bill, then we have to work with them to figure out what's wrong and to indicate to the customers that if we don't come up with a plan in which you pay your bill, then we would have to disconnect you from the network. But we do have programs in place where if someone comes to us, we do have payment plans that you can work out, and we're asking you, because when somebody gets a house or an apartment, I'm sure everybody budgets for power. So the least we would expect you to do if you can't pay your bill in full is pay toward the electricity that you've been consuming.
Jerome, I just want to underline something the chairman said. We don't charge you for the electricity you do not use.
So if your lights are off, you aren't getting charged. But if your lights off, you still could get disconnected for non-payment.
For non-payment, precisely. And it's not the most pleasant.
That's a difficult pill to swallow.
But it is the reality. Yes, I'm sorry.
Gentlemen, we are going to continue our discussion right after this. For those of you who are watching, if you are enjoying our discussion, be sure and stay tuned. Our show continues right after this. Hello and welcome to On the Record, and the balanced, true, and open debate you've been looking for.
When we had the fire at BPL and we looked around at clearing it up and cleaning up, and you looked at the plaque to see when some of those generators were installed, the minister responsible at that time was Loftus Roker. Some of those generators are your age.
40-something?
Yeah, they are in your age group. So just imagine that we have generators that were older than you, and they were powering our city, and we were so complacent all of these years that we didn't replace them. What we did instead over the last few years, was bring in rental generation that cost us significant millions of dollars, that was not the most reliable, and we sought to utilize that instead of looking for permanent solutions. What we have now in the Bahamas is a plan for a permanent solution that is going to make a difference in your life, in the lives of your family, and that you can have reliable, dependable electricity.
I was the Minister for Works a few weeks ago as he appeared on this very set, talking about the generation issues that you were having. Tonight on the record, we're attempting to get answers from BPL on their power struggles. My guest, the chairman, Donovan Moxey, and Director of Public Relations, Quincy Parker. $95 million being spent on this new plant, 7 generators. Why are we just seeing the wisdom of this now? We have generators older than I am. I'm 47. Cars don't even run that long.
Yeah, I know. It's, you know what, I'm not going to sort of question the decisions of my predecessors. All I know is the new board that was put in August of last year, August 16th of last year. We were faced with issues and challenges around BPL, and we decided that we were going to fix it. And the very first step in all of this was really understanding that in New Providence, we have not been the best at generation in terms of doing it efficiently and effectively. So the strategic decision was made earlier prior to our board was bringing in a vendor like, or a partner like Shell North America that we can outsource baseload generation to. Now here's what it does for us. From a costing perspective, we are still in the midst of negotiating with Shell a power purchase agreement where we're buying power from them at a fixed rate. That fixed rate is now what we then would utilize to make sure that we keep the rate stable for Bahamians. Additionally, because these generators or this power plant will be designed to run on liquid natural gas or LNG, our cost for fuel is going to go down probably by about 2 to 3 times. Additionally, with that, one of the biggest complaints we get from our customers is the fluctuation in the price of fuel.
Yes,
we all
Lord.
see the fuel pass-through. When you look at LNG, our primary supplier of LNG in the Western Hemisphere is the United States of America. That's been a fairly stable fuel for the last 10 years. Not only that, we have things that we can do with respect to hedging where you can now lock fuel prices in for the long term. So our position here is to solve the baseload generation problem in New Providence by getting a partner who will be responsible for generating our baseload. We'll still be responsible for peaking and emergencies, but using a fuel now that's the lowest cost fuel that we can get into this island that has stable prices.
I have to ask though, the $95 million that's being spent to get this new plant off the ground, that's going just into the plant. Was there consideration for, or how has that now affected your ability to continue to provide power? Because if you've got 95 that's being directed,
right.
95 million, that's a huge sum. That's
Correct.
about 100 million.
Correct.
How did that directly affect your operations?
What it did for us, obviously we had
were
to make...
Were you advised that that could have any kind of effect?
We looked at all of the financial implications. We knew we needed to make a decision, a strategic decision. So again, we did that in partnership with Shell North America, because obviously making an investment of that size, you don't want those assets to be stranded. So in our discussion with Shell, we said to them, we have to make a decision for the upcoming summer. We know we're negotiating with you this PPA arrangement to build a brand new power plant. We want you to work with us to help us really pick the right engines, knowing full well that the engines we pick, the power plant we build, will be absorbed into the new power plant that you're building at Shell. Shell understood and Shell agreed to that. So from that perspective, we were then making an investment where the assets would not be stranded, if you will. Those assets would be absorbed into Shell. Now, the $95 million is a large sum, and that's in building the entire power plant. That includes the engines, the construction, the auxiliary, everything that goes into that. And we had to do it that way because, again, this power plant was going to be absorbed into Shell. So we have to build a plant that meets their standards with respect to how it's constructed and how it's operated. So we needed to make that investment. Now, what that did for us is a number of things that we needed to do with respect to upgrading of T&D that were on our schedule, and some other infrastructure projects. We had to put those projects on hold.
So some things have gone on hold.
Some things went on hold.
Has that
because
affected us? Has that led to where we are now?
No, I wouldn't say that at all, because here's the thing. What you would typically do on the infrastructure part in the during the wintertime is you would do these major overhauls of your engines, which sometimes cost you $3, $4, $5 million to do. You do multiple of that. But because we had limited capacity, we could only do the minor upgrades. We couldn't take engines offline. And so the money that we would normally allocate for those huge maintenance couldn't happen, simply because of our situation.
But 2 weeks ago, you had 2 engines that went down in the middle of scheduled load shedding. Did that, in any way, not being able to maintain those as you should have during the winter months, did that lead to that situation 2 weeks ago?
Not being able to maintain had nothing to do with not having the funds allocated to do that. It had to do with the fact that you had limited generation, and you couldn't bring down engines completely off the line in order to do full maintenance for 2, 3, 4 months. So that's what led to not being able to do that.
I've got to ask this as well. $95 million for a new plant. Any consideration to alternative energy?
Oh, yes.
We can't continue
Yes.
down this road. We are a
Yes.
country that's,
Yes.
that's surrounded by water, wind, sun.
Yes.
We are not tapping into any of these.
As part of our long-term strategy, renewable energy, primarily solar, is within BPL strategic plans. We have plans to build what we call utility-grade solar generation facility in New Providence. We also have what we call a small-scale renewable generation plan, or SSRG, where any business or any homeowner can participate in that particular program, where you can build up to 100 kilowatts of solar generation, rooftop. That's all available
How
to
soon
you.
can we
The
expect that?
SSRG program is available today, now. And so if someone wants to build solar on their home or their business up to 100 kilowatts, which is pretty significant, when you look at the average home probably has about a 7 to 9 kilowatt solar installation, which can cost you anywhere between $30,000 to $40,000.
And I couldn't see you were about to say, but I want to go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, we've had more than 200 applications to the SSRG program. Close to 120 people are already using the program. And what the benefit of this program for the consumer is, if you generate excess power from your solar system, you can feed that excess power back to the BPL grid, and BPL will give you a credit against your fuel surcharge. And there are, like I said, about 120 people already on the program.
How long does it take? I mean, is it a seamless process? Is it a long process?
If in the months that you generate the excess power that goes back to the grid,
No, I mean in getting it set up,
Yeah,
and applying for it.
That particular process involves multiple agencies. So we've got Ministry of Works, we got Environment involved, and we got BPL. Now, obviously, what we're doing, what we've been tasked with, is streamlining the process. Because
Yes.
it could take a couple of months to get through the entire process of the
So it
application.
could be
And
a
the
lengthy
Yes,
process.
and a couple of things that we're doing here. You're talking about putting electrical systems in persons' homes. We want to make sure that's done in a safe and responsible manner. And so there's a process we go through. We recognize that it's longer than what most people want. So we're working with all the agencies to streamline that process.
So I've got to ask this question as well. From the consumer perspective, we see BPL as a cash cow. I mean, we pay heavily. Like I always admit, I put a little something on the bill. We pay.
Right.
But yet it seems you are troubled at times to meet your obligations. How is a corporation or a company that takes in so much cash finding itself in financial issues?
Here's the thing that the Bahamian public needs to recognize. We can
Quincy, I
send
see you
out a
smiling on the side.
significant amount of bills to our customers, but the reality is that more than half of our customers don't pay their bills on time. And so, as any business person would recognize and know, that cash flow is the lifeblood of every business.
You said
And
more than half?
More than half don't pay their bills on time. And then when you look at people who pay on time, people
We
who
can't pay on
30
time.
days.
When your bill almost doubles sometime, with a fuel surcharge,
Right.
That's an expense that you have not budgeted for.
But we recognize that. And that's one of the reasons why strategically we're getting out of the liquid fuel business and getting into LNG. Stable prices, much, much lower. But what we'd ask the public to do is that we recognize that, many of us are responsible people who know how to budget. So your electric bill may be $500 in a certain month, but maybe you budget $200 or $300. Pay that towards your bill. That helps. And then if you have trouble because of other circumstances, come into BPL. We have programs there designed to assist you. What we don't want to do, the last resort for us, is taking somebody off the grid. Our position is, we understand the circumstances happen. Life happens. Come into us, talk with us, and we will work with you.
The other side of the coin, Jerome, is conservation and energy efficiency. There are some people who have managed to so arrange their lifestyle that they keep their bill below $100 a month without losing quality of life, right? So it's things like changing out light bulbs, it's making sure that you have proper insulation, it's making sure that you're using high efficiency appliances, things like maybe even putting a timer on a water heater, or in making sure that that water heater is properly insulated, so that you don't need to waste energy heating up the water. It's unplugging things and turning off breakers to make sure that you're not using power even while you're sleeping and the thing is not serving any purpose. Right. So BPL has started we're kind of ramping up a conservation and efficiency campaign so that people understand that the power to bring your bill down is something that you have as much as BPL does. When we go to hedging and we're able to bring a more stable rate that you can count on for however many months at a time, it's still within your power to bring your energy use down and bring your bill to something that is unaffordable.
I often wonder, though, are our rates comparable to other countries and those around us?
Yeah, I'll speak to that as well. One of the things that Bahamians don't realize, and we said this several months ago, BPL has the lowest electricity rates in the country. Okay?
So you said in the country?
In the country. The lowest electricity rates in the country. When you look at the three utilities, there's Grand Bahama Power, there's the St. George's Power Station.
But most of us are on BPL, sir.
But I know BPL, but here's
most of us use BPL.
But here's how we look at it. What actually drives the cost up is the fuel surcharge. And that's something that we've been working on. And what's been driving that even larger is the rental generations that we have. You heard the minister said in the previous segment, decisions were made years ago before we were here. Rather than find a permanent solution, it was rental. So here's what we do. BPL pays almost $2 million a month for rental generation. The rental generations that we have run on diesel oil, which is the most expensive fuel. When you compare that to heavy fuel oil, it's almost about 50 to 60 times more expensive, if not more. That's driving up the price of fuel. And so where we are right now is we're looking to solve that issue, if you will. And so that's what drives the price of fuel, coupled also with geopolitical events. So now you have the Iranians and the US and the other guys, and so that drives the price of oil. So we're at the mercy of world markets.
I'm being hammered to go to a break. We've got to take another break. Our final segment is still to come. Stay with us. Hello and welcome to On the Record, a debate-style television talk show where Bahamians will find the balanced, true, and open debate they've been looking for.
And the icon goes to On the Record.
On the Record was born out of a desire to do something different. What we do every day helps our country, it helps our society, it helps to shape the views and opinions.
Listen, what is more dangerous than
gentlemen,
corruption?
we've got to move very quickly. Let's wrap up.
Integrity.
It's all On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. Our discussion begins on the other side of this break.
First of all, you can have reliable generation. And secondly, you can have low electricity bills.
Okay.
I will assure you of those two things.
The minister himself giving us those assurances when he was here a few weeks ago. Donovan Moxey, will that be the case? Are we going to have reliable electricity?
Yes, we intend to have.
And lower bills.
And we will look at lower bills, lower fuel
surcharge.
surcharge.
Lower bills?
We will have lower bills, and because of the lower fuel cost.
One thing I have to bring up though before we go, and we're almost out of time. But President of the Electrical Workers Union, Paul Maynard, says this is the worst it's ever been. Leader of the opposition said the same thing. It's never been this bad.
May I?
Go ahead.
Last year, there was a period of time when BPL was without power for 48 hours. 2 straight days, no power. It's never the worst it's ever been. It feels that way now because this is the moment that we are in. and BPL recognizing that its number one job is to keep the power on, we tote the blow that we are not keeping the power on 100% of the time. But the reality is, there is never a moment at which you can say this is the worst it's ever been. That's always propaganda.
I have been covering power outages as a journalist from the 90s.
Right.
I know my own personal experience from the. I know Christmas holidays.
That is always
for periods of time. But it's expedient in some quarters to say that, and I'm not going to get into that because you all are here to speak to the politics of it. The people just want to know, when is it going to stop?
Yes.
People are fed up and they're tired.
Yes.
They want to know when it is going to stop.
Understood. And we understand that. Here's the plan. Strategically, the board has laid out a plan where, again, we're taking out a base load generation. Shell North America is bringing in the gas to power plant. That now gives us a power plant that's being run independently by someone who has certain requirements to meet, and all we do is consume the power at a fixed rate. The fuel cost will go down by about 3 times, given the price of liquid natural gas on the open market. So we're also negotiating stabilizing that fuel price. So what we're going to tell Bahamians is, and we're doing everything we can to keep the rates the way they are. That's the electricity rate, the 10.9, 11.9, and 12.9 cents per kilowatt hour, which, by the way, again, lowest in the Bahamas of any utility provider, the 3rd lowest in the Caribbean. When we look at now the fuel surcharge, we're looking to bring that down significantly.
Because that's what kills us.
That's what kills all of us. And again, we don't have a lot of control over that, other than the fact that the rental generations, which were brought in about 4 or 5 years ago, that's driving up our fuel costs. And recognizing now, especially with the 132 megawatts, that's going to be run on heavy fuel oil, lower fuel costs. So we will see now a dip in our fuel costs when that new plant comes on. And you will continue to see a reduction in fuel costs as we bring on those assets that run the lower cost fuel, the heavy fuel oil as well as the LNG. And so what we're negotiating and we're working on with Shell is bringing price stability throughout. The other thing as a part of our strategy is incorporating renewables. The first place where we're going to do that significantly is in the Family Islands. We have the Ragged Island RFP that went out. Ragged Island should be on stream by December of this year, being 98% on renewable energy. We're looking at now the rest of the islands. We have RFPs that'll go out for the islands of Exuma, island of Bimini, Inagua, and Eleuthera on renewable energy. We're also working on plans with the Office of the Prime Minister to solarize the entire Bahamas over several years. And so now we're looking at getting into those forms of generation as well for us.
Quincy, I'm going to give you the liberty, since you are my journalist colleague, of having the last set of words. One of the things that I'm happy to know is that you will be publishing the schedule, but you know, more communication is what people are screaming for, and I get your point. It's out there, but you know, we don't always read it.
Absolutely, absolutely. We are one of the reasons that I'm at BPL is I believe it is the most important company in the country. I couldn't imagine a place where a guy like me could make a better contribution, right? So as a person responsible for communications, I am committed to ensuring that you as a consumer don't feel like I didn't tell you. So to the extent that you feel that way, Jerome, I'm sorry. And to our wider customer base, we apologize and we'll do better. I have a communication schedule that is at least 1 touch per day, and it's probably going to, especially during this load shedding, it's going to be more frequent than that. We have a WhatsApp community group with 20 group leaders who have their own WhatsApp groups that we are.
But you know, if it ain't on WhatsApp, it don't exist.
Exactly. And so we have that communication channel is up and running. We have somebody on Facebook at all hours of the day and night to answer questions and to push information. And we are excited to be at this moment in time available and able to speak to the Bahamian people. I wanted to circle back around and say Station A at Clifton Pier will not be the end of all trouble or problems, but it will bring a serious measure of relief to the New Providence community.
And we thank you for that. You know, at the end of the day, that is what we all want. We want a stable power source, and we want to be able to afford it, and we don't want it to, you know, continue to be that one bill that hangs over our head that we worry about paying every month. And that is a reality, not just for consumers, but for people in business as well. It is a huge impediment. And so, gentlemen, I implore you, I implore the board and everybody there to do what you can to get us in a better place.
Definitely. And Jerome, thank you very much for allowing us the opportunity.
And thank you for coming on. I know it was not an easy thing to do. As I told you before we started the show, in my other life, I was at BTC when we went through a similarly difficult process, so I know how hard it can be. But thank you, and please continue to communicate. I think, you know, in the absence of information, I always say that there's not just misinformation, there's chaos. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us. Next year, when we sit down here to talk, we got a different conversation. I hope so. I'm holding you to it. You see, whenever you come on the show, we remind you what you said. All right. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming. We hope that you've enjoyed our show tonight. Special thanks to my guests, Mr. Donovan Moxey and Mr. Quincy Parker, also to my producer and technical staff. Once again, I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. We'll see you next time. Gentlemen.